All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to BI207 lab. This week we're going to start with lab 3, which covers some histology. So you're probably not quite here in lecture yet, but we'll be talking about tissues, basic tissue types, and then some more specific types of tissue. Typically in the lab, this is one of the most difficult labs for students to understand. It's kind of just a lot of memorization. So there's 14 different tissues you need to know. You need to be able to identify what they look like, know where they're found, the location, and know their function. So typically in a regular semester and face-to-face, that's kind of a lot to memorize, right? So students typically do very poorly on this quiz. So you guys are kind of at an advantage because you can use your notes. So it's really easy to look up these answers, right? But this information you're going to be seeing throughout 207 and into 208 as well. So I've said it before, but if you don't actually learn this information now and you're just 100% relying on your notes, it's going to be very detrimental to you down the road. So at least I would recommend very, very bare minimum knowing the tissue names and being able to identify the tissues. A lot of times the functions, you can kind of guess what the function of the tissue is based on what it looks like. And then the location kind of makes sense as well. Okay, so as long as you know the names and what they look like, the rest you can kind of infer and you'll be fine. This quiz shouldn't be too bad, but again, this information will also be on the final, which you will not have nearly as much time for. So make sure that you are taking good notes and staying organized and actually trying to learn some of this information at least. Okay, let's get started. So there's 4 primary tissue types in your body. So everything in your body is made up of one of these 4 types of tissue, right? So we have epithelial tissue, which covers the surface of our body or lines cavities of our bodies. So you can think of like the surface of our skin, the skin that you can see, or that gets, you know, whatever, on the outside of your body, and also on the inside of your body. So your esophagus, in your trachea, in all of your internal organs. Um, it's lined with epithelial tissue, okay? So that's the first type. We also have connective tissue, which is going to be things like different types of cartilage we have, bones, blood are technically connective tissue, things that are just kind of like in between. We have nervous tissue, which is just the brain and spinal cord, and any cranial nerves or spinal nerves extending out to the periphery. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about the nervous system. And then the 4th primary tissue type is muscle. You can have different types of muscle: cardiac, smooth, skeletal muscle. All obviously muscle, the function of it is to move stuff, whether it's skeletal muscle, moving your body, cardiac muscle, pumping blood through your heart, or smooth muscle, which is in control of the movement of like food and stuff through your internal organs, right? Digestive system. Think about your stomach churning that food over. That would be smooth muscle. Again, we're going to talk about muscle way more in depth when we get to the muscle section. So this week, the tissues that we're looking at are only going to be either epithelial tissue or connective tissue. Okay, we're not going to see any nervous tissue or muscle this week. Okay, so epithelial or connective tissue only. Okay, so starting with epithelial tissue, so the basic tissue type is epithelial, but there's a lot of subdivisions of this. Like I said before, epithelial tissue either covers the body surface or lines a body cavity. So again, the epidermis, outside layer of your skin, or the lining of your stomach, or the lining of your intestines, all will be epithelial tissue. This means that if you're looking at a slide with epithelial tissue on it, you're always going to see what's called the lumen. The lumen is just a space, right? So this is an example of an epithelial tissue. It's simple squamous epithelial. all of these white spaces, those are all lumen. So this is actually taken from the alveoli of your lungs. And there's a cross section done. So these spaces is where air would be entering into your lungs, and CO2 would be exiting, right? So epithelial tissue always, always, always has a lumen. No matter what type of epithelial it is, you're going to see some sort of space, okay? Epithelial tissue is named based on two different things. First, how many layers it has. If it has one single layer, like these guys, it's called a simple tissue, right? Simple just because there's one layer. If there's multiple layers stacked on top of each other, it's called stratified. Okay, so you can have either simple or stratified, depending on how many layers. And then the second part of the name is based on what the cells actually look like. So the first type we have squamous, some people say squamous, which looks flat, like little flat pancakes. Okay, so we have a simple squamous, which is one layer of flat pancakes. Stratified squamous, which is many, many, many layers of those flat pancakes. We have cuboidal, which is cube or square shaped, right? Again, we can have simple cuboidal. We can also have stratified cuboidal, but that's not one that you guys need to know. We can also have what's called a columnar type of tissue, which looks like rectangles or columns, right? So again, simple columnar is a single layer. And then for the stratified columnar, you'll see in a minute, it's actually considered pseudostratified, the one that we're going to be looking at. I'll go into more details in a second here, but again, you can have multiple layers, which would be pseudostratified. And then the last type of epithelial tissue that we have doesn't fall into this nice naming scheme. That is called transitional epithelial tissue. And I'll show you that in a second. It's transitional because it doesn't always have a distinct shape. Transitional epithelial is meant to be able to stretch. So it might look cuboidal in some cases, and then when it stretches, it looks more squamous. Okay, so it's never going to look the same, and it kind of looks like a combination of cuboidal and squamous together. Okay, so on the quiz or the final exam, when you're naming a tissue, you need to give me the full entire name. Okay, so for example, this simple squamous, that's like the specific name, but it's epithelial tissue. So you need to write simple squamous epithelial tissue, or simple squamous epithelial is fine. Okay, so the full name. So all of these that we're going to look at in a second, you need to say epithelial after. Okay, so the first one we've seen simple squamous epithelial. Again, it's kind of hard to see here, but these are all little individual pancake cells. The dark spots are the nuclei, actually. So you can see that there's very, very few nuclei around here because it's just one single layer. Again, these white spaces are the lumen. And the shapes of the cells kind of give you an idea of their function. So first I'm going to talk about, the function here. So the function of simple squamous is to allow materials to pass via diffusion and filtration. Also sometimes secretes a lubricating substance. But if you think about it, if you have one single layer of these flat little pancakes, it's really easy for stuff to move, right? Because you have one layer, something has to penetrate. Okay, so simple cells is a lot of times going to be diffusion, filtration, or absorption and secretion, depending on the type. But something that's allowing things to enter or exit the cell is always typically going to be a simple cell. So simple squamous is diffusion and filtration. Again, if we know the function, the locations kind of make sense. So this is the alveoli of the lungs. Obviously, we're going to have oxygen and carbon dioxide passing via diffusion and filtration through here, right? Kidney glomeruli, that's where blood, in the glomeruli, we have blood, the plasma of blood being kind of filtered out to make urine. Lining of the heart, blood vessels, again, in the blood vessels, you need diffusion and filtration. Lymphatic vessels lining ventral body cavity, okay? So typically for these, I'm just going to ask you to know one location and one function. So I always remember things that kind of make sense together: the alveoli of the lungs, diffusion and filtration. Okay, so that's simple squamous epithelial. We have simple cuboidal epithelial. Again, a single layer. You can see these dark circles are the nuclei, and we have a single layer of nuclei, right? And these are surrounding a lumen again. So you're going to have multiple things on one slide here, but the main thing, especially what the pointer is pointing at, is a simple cuboidal epithelial around lumen. Here's a lumen, here's a lumen, here's a lumen, right? And square-shaped cells, the nuclei are round, but the cells themselves are square-shaped. These are found in kidney tubules, ducts, and secretory portions of glands and the ovary surface. Its function is secretion and absorption. So again, in the kidney tubules, you have the urine starting to be formed. So it's allowing different things to move in and out of the urine. In glands, you're secreting different sorts of substances, ovary surface, etc. So again, one location, one function, simple cuboidal epithelial tissue. Next, we have simple columnar. So you're going to see, again, these dark circles are the nuclei. And the trick for this, if you see the nuclei in like a straight line, it's going to be simple columnar. Down here, it doesn't look so good, but just focus on what the pointer is pointing at. So in a straight line, the columns aren't, as easy to see. This isn't a diagram. This is an actual tissue slide, so it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be like a drawing. Okay, but columnar shaped, simple, all the nuclei are in one line. We know it's epithelial because, again, we're going to have this lumen here. Simple columnar, there's two different types, non-ciliated and ciliated. So on the surface, sometimes we'll see cilia or little hairs. So the non-ciliated type lines the digestive tract, gallbladder, and ducts of glands. Ciliated lines the bronchi, uterine tubes, and regions of the uterus. Function, absorption, secretion of mucus and enzymes, and to propel mucus, which is for the ciliated type. So those little hairs that are the cilia move in like a wave-like pattern to propel stuff along. So in the uterine tubes, when we have an ovum or an egg released, it's going to move through this little lumen. So those cilia are going to help push it along. Okay. In here, we can also see these blue-looking things are goblet cells. Those are really important. They are what's actually secreting the mucus to keep this lubricated. Okay. But digestive tract, it's what I remember, and they absorb things. This is my favorite location and function. Okay, so that's simple columnar. Here is pseudostratified columnar epithelial. Again, epithelial will have a lumen. You could tell the nuclei aren't in a nice straight line like before, so it's pseudostratified. It's not technically stratified, which is why we call it pseudostratified, but it looks stratified. So we're just going to pseudostratified columnar. Again, so you can see on the top here, these ones have cilia on them. These can be found in sperm ducts, in the trachea, and most of the upper respiratory tract. Function is secretion and propulsion. Again, we're secreting some different mucus, stuff like that, and propelling, again, with those cilia, especially in the sperm ducts, getting those sperms to move along. Okay? Next, we have stratified squamous epithelial. So you can see they're like little flat pancakes. We have the big lumen up here. And the one we're always going to show you for this is a keratinized, which we'll talk about when we talk about the integumentary system. But this is on the surface of your skin. This is your epidermis. So these little wispy layers on the top is like dead skin cells, right? You know, the surface of your skin, you're going to have some dead cells. So this section here and the section we're always going to show you with stratified squamous has these wisps on the top. So these line the esophagus, mouth, and vagina, and then can be found all over the epidermis of your skin. And if you think about these locations, your esophagus, mouth, vagina, epidermis, These are all areas that have a lot of abrasion, right? Esophagus, if you're eating different food, or your mouth, you're chewing things that are sharp and hard. You don't want one single layer of cells to protect all the important underlying tissues, right? You want a lot of layers to add for more protection, right? So if you get a cut or a scrape, or you eat something that's maybe a little bit too hot, instead of damaging the important tissues down here, you're going to damage just the top layer of the stratified squamous and protect the underlying tissues. So the function of stratified squamous is protection. And again, stratified, if we have a lot of layers, that's what helps protect the tissues underneath. Okay, and then the last type of epithelial, again, you can see a huge lumen here, is transitional. This is the weird guy. It kind of looks like stratified squamous, kind of looks a little cuboidally, really hard to tell. But the reason that we keep the stratified squamous with these wisps on top is so it's more easily differentiable. It's easier to differentiate between transitional. So transitional looks similar to stratified squamous, but it will never have those wisps on top. Okay, so the function of the function of transitional, like I said earlier, is to stretch, which is why it doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it looks cuboidal, and when it stretches out, it's going to be flatter, more squamous looking. And this is going to be lining places that stretching is important. So the ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra. So your bladder obviously is going to fill with urine. Okay. So when your bladder fills with urine, it's going to get bigger, and it needs these special transitional epithelial to be able to stretch to hold that liquid, right? So in your urinary system mostly is where you're going to see transitional epithelial. Okay. The last type of tissue we're going to see today is connective tissue. Again, connective tissue is the basic tissue type. And all of these tissues are classified together because they're all derived from the same embryonic tissue type, which is called a mesenchyme. You don't need to know this, but it's kind of interesting. So this is an example. This is what mesenchyme looks like. So again, it's in the embryonic tissue. And all of the things that are connective tissue start as mesenchyme, right? Which is why they're, again, all in one group. So there's different types. We have some dense connective tissues, either regular or irregular. Loose connective tissues, areolar, adipose, or reticular. Cartilage, where we have elastic, hyaline, or fibrocartilage. And then bone and blood are also technically types of connective tissue, but we're not going to look at these today. So we're just going to be looking at dense, loose, and cartilage connective tissues. And again, there's going to be a lot of different subtypes for all of these. Unlike epithelial, I'll go into detail with these. Okay, so the first one, we're going to start with a loose connective tissue. We have loose areolar connective tissue. Again, on the quiz or exam, you need to give me the entire name of the tissue, including the basic tissue type. So you need loose areolar connective tissue. So you can see here, there's no lumen. We have a bunch of different fibers making up this solid mass of tissue. This can be found under the epithelia of the body, around your organs, and around your capillaries. And its function is just to wrap and cushion organs. So it kind of adds an extra layer of protection to cushion your organs. It has specialized cells that are macrophages that phagocytize bacteria. So get rid of bacteria or any pathogens. It plays a role in inflammation response, and it holds and conveys tissue fluid. So again, I just remember it's around the organs and it wraps and cushions organs. Okay, and it's loose because all of these fibers are pretty spread out. There's a lot of like empty spaces. It's not actually spaces, but all those fibers are really spread out. Next, we have loose adipose connective tissue, and the adipose is just fat, right? So it's a fancy, I guess, name for fat. This one, a lot of students really easily mix up with simple squamous because it kind of looks similar to what we looked where the alveoli of the lungs, right? But in loose adipose connective tissue, this whole thing that I'm outlining right here, each of these like bubbles is actually the whole cell, right? So this is not a lumen, it's a solid mass of fat, okay? So adipose connective tissue is where your fat is stored. So the more fat you have, the bigger these cells get. And the nuclei and other organelles of the cell are pushed around the edge. Okay, so these big spots in the middle is just fat. And what's interesting about adipose is you can't gain or lose adipose cells. What happens if you like gain weight or lose weight, these either just get bigger or they get smaller, which is why sometimes like on your legs or something, you have like bumpy, fat lumps if you're heavier or whatever, have bigger legs. I know I cellulose, right? Cellulose is in plants. Cellulite, is that what they call it? Anyway, you see those like bumps on your legs or places that have more fat. It's because these cells are so big, right? So you can literally see those adipose cells under your skin. Okay, so location of adipose connective tissue loose is any place you would find fat. So under your skin, around kidneys and eyeballs, within your abdomen, and in breast tissue. Function is to provide reserve fuel. So that's the point of fat, is the extra storage. So if you need energy, don't have access to food, you have this fat reserve that your body can break down for energy. Insulates, supports, and protects organs. Okay. So the only way to like get rid of fat tissue, did I already say this? I don't remember, is liposuction, right? So the only time you're ever going to like change the number of adipose cells you have is liposuction, or if you like lose something, lose an arm or whatever. Okay, cut it out of your body somehow. The last type of loose connective tissue is loose reticular connective tissue. Again, there's no lumens, but this is loose because the fibers are pretty spread out. So it looks like there's gaps, but no true lumen. Function of reticular connective tissue is just to support other cells. So it's found in a lot of lymphoid organs, bone marrow, lymph nodes, and your spleen. This one's pretty straightforward. There's also some slides where this is dyed a little bit differently and looks almost purple. But this kind of reminds me of like little grapes. I don't know why. There's like little dots around. So I think of little like grapes when I see that. So loose reticular. Next, we have two dense connective tissues. We have dense regular connective tissue. So dense because these are all those little purple dots are the nuclei. So you can see how closely these cells are all packed together. Everyone always tries to say that this is muscle. I'm telling you right now, none of the answers on this quiz are going to be muscle. No, never going to be muscle. If you think it looks like muscle, it's probably dense regular connective tissue. This can be found in tendons, ligaments, and aponeuroses. So an aponeurosis is a like sheet, like tendon, ligament, holding stuff together. So attaching muscle to bone, bone to bone, and withstanding great tensile stress in a single direction. So our tendon and ligaments are being pulled on either end by a muscle. They're connected to the bone, whatever it may be. So this one would be oriented, so be pulled like this way, down this way or something, right? So dense regular connective tissue. We also have dense irregular. This one's kind of harder to see, but the nuclei are going to be all packed in these little blips, and they're really densely packed. This is also important to withstand tension, but this time in many directions. So this is going to be in the capsules of your organs and joints, in the dermis of your skin, and submucosa of the digestive tract. So this dense irregular connective tissue can be pulled in multiple directions, and kind of provides like structural support, structural strength. And irregular, obviously, because it's not that nice, sheet-like appearance, but it's very tough. So dense tissues are going to be providing some sort of strength, withstanding tension, etc. Okay? And then the last type of connective tissue we're going to talk about is cartilage. So there's 3 types. In cartilage, we can see that there's like individual cells. So we have hyaline cartilage. These are all individual cells. Elastic cartilage. These are all individual cells. And then fibrocartilage. They're a little bit more spread out, but you also have cells. Each of those cells, those are called chondrocytes, right? In cartilage, we have chondrocytes. And those are just the cell types. So hyaline cartilage connective tissue, again, you need that full name. You can see the chondrocytes here with a nuclei in the middle. This can be found in most of the embryonic skeleton, at the ends of your long bones, costal cartilage of ribs, cartilage of nose, trachea, and larynx. So in a lot of places, function, support, reinforce, cushion, resist compressive stress. So I always remember at the end of long bones, this is there and it's cushioning. Those two make the most sense for me to remember. Because cushioning, making sure your bones don't like rub on each other. Okay. We have elastic cartilage connective tissue. Again, we can see the chondrocytes here. This is found only in 2 places, your external ear. So if you get like your ear pierced, it's pierced through elastic cartilage, and the epiglottis. So the function of this is basically just to be super flexible, but still maintain some sort of shape. So your ear obviously can move around a lot, but you can move it around, whatever, but it still stays in that ear shape to get noises into your head, right? So flexible but maintains shape. And then the last type, fibrocartilage connective tissue. Again, chondrocytes with a nuclei. This one's one of my favorite. I think it looks like a planet, doesn't it? These are found in your intervertebral discs. So in your back, between your vertebrae, you have little discs of fibrocartilage to cushion. In your pubic symphysis and the disc of your knee joint or meniscus. Tensile strength and absorbing compressive shock, which makes sense if it's between your vertebrae or in your knee joints, absorbing that shock from your vertebrae, smushing, compressing together. Okay. All right, so again, for all of these, you need to know what they look like, be able to identify them, their full names. You will have to type these names out. And then know at least a location and a function. There might be some matching where you need to match, but you have your notes, so it shouldn't be too bad. There are more tissues than you need to know in your book, so just the ones that are covered on this PowerPoint and in your handout you're required to know. All right, so that's histology. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. Should be pretty straightforward, especially since you guys get to use your notes. But all right, bye.